Any successful athlete most likely has an agent, but when it comes to Olympic athletes, they oftentimes have to work harder to get the representation they deserve. On this episode, I talk with a sports agent who represents these athletes. We'll talk about how she's made an impact in her industry, what it takes to be an athlete agent, and how she works with both her clients and brands to create win-win scenarios. Next on Sports in the Making. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making, a podcast where we talk to people who work in the sports and broadcasting industries, find out what they do and what goes into their careers. I'm your host, Don Cardona, and this is episode 14. Well, I hope that everything is going well with everyone while we are all on lockdown, and by listening to this podcast, I hope that it's providing you with some entertainment while allowing me to highlight some of the best people in sports who we don't often get to hear from. I look forward to continuing to bring more episodes to you as much as I can. My guest on this episode is someone that I met in 2015 while I was at Universal Sports Network. She visited our studios in Centennial, Colorado to see what we did and talk about Olympic athletes. The more I talked with her, the more I realized how interesting her career is in representing athletes, some of the best elite athletes in the world. It had been a while since we last spoke, but her background resonated with me. My upcoming conversation is with Heather Novickis, an athlete agent for Olympic, Paralympic, and Endurance athletes, and a partner in an agency called the Human Interest Group. In her 20-year career, she has worked with major firms, including Octagon, IMG, and she's also built her own agency, Kinetic Sports Management, procuring industry-leading endorsements and sponsorships for numerous Olympic medalists and world champions. We talk about what it takes to be an athlete agent, how agents work with brands, how she builds relationships with all of her partners, and much more. This is my conversation with Heather Novickis of the Human Interest Group. Heather, thank you for joining me. I'm really excited to catch up with you again and talk to you about what it is you do.
Thanks so much for having me, Don. Pleasure to be here.
So I usually try to make a connection with people that I've worked with or I've had contact with in my career, and we had a pretty good short conversation about what it is you do. And I was intrigued about everything we talked about, and I thought it would be great to share that info with our audience, especially with the type of athletes you represent.
I appreciate your curiosity and thanks for your interest. I think that, my job tends to promote an image of glamour and fantastic experiences that certainly come along with the job and appear here and there. But, at the end of the day, my job is a lot of heads down, selling phone calls, emails, supporting athlete clients, supporting their brand partnerships. So I think it's just like any other job when it comes to, goal setting and sales goals. And there is a lot of hard work that goes into it. But I might venture to say that, highlights such as getting to watch your athlete clients perform well at an event, cross the finish line, get to a world championships, win an Olympic medal is certainly a great benefit and high that is great to experience with them.
When did you realize this is what you wanted to do?
I went to University of Colorado Boulder as an international business and marketing major there. And while I was at CU, the marketing department launched their first student marketing program. So I was one of the first 3 student athlete interns at the CU sports marketing department. And we had the opportunity to organize halftime events for basketball games. Coach Rick Neuheisel was leading the Buffs for the football team then. So we got to be down in the field and run some different, student activities. And it really was a lot of fun and a great intro to a side of sports that I had never seen. I grew up I love sports growing up. I skied, I played basketball, I ran. I did a lot of things. I did not do anything collegiately other than play intramural basketball. So for me, just athletics and sport was always a lot of fun. And to have the opportunity, I think, to cross over and work or experience some work on the other side of sport, to see what goes into putting on a sporting event, what goes into being a coach or a marketer was really fun for me. And so that was kind of my first taste of, quote unquote, the sports marketing industry.
So you were caught up in the glamour of what we call sports, right?
Yes, I was. And I might say at the time, there was not yet or at least I didn't know about it then, a graduate program for sports management. Now there are numerous programs. I know DU just down the street from me in Denver has a great program, but when I was in school, that was not an opportunity for me to pursue from a degree perspective. So I kind of started reformulating what I wanted to do after I graduated from school. And at the time, I went to school for engineering for a year. I loved math and science until that was all I did at CU. And then I hated math and science. And when I sat back and decided what I saw myself doing for the rest of my life, I said, well, I love sports. So if I can figure out a way to work in sports somehow, I think I'd be pretty happy. And on the back end of interning for the CU marketing department, I also started interning for a local boutique Olympic athlete management company called Gold Medal Management, owned by Brad Hunt, formerly with IMG, led their track and field division. And that was kind of my introduction into the athlete agent world.
What did you like about that when you first got to Gold Medal Management?
I loved that it was a completely different side of sport than I had seen. I loved that Olympic athletes were simply driven to be the best at what they did. Very few Olympic athletes ever get to the level of stardom that Michael Johnson, who was one of Brad's clients, or Amy Van Dyken, or Dominique Moceanu, or Peekaboo Street, Johnny Mosley. Very few athletes get that level of notoriety. And for me to have an opportunity to get to know those athletes and understand how the endorsement procurement process works, what goes into creating a strategic brand athlete contract for your client was really eye-opening and very exciting. And it just became a big passion of mine and a field that I wanted to learn more and more about. So it wasn't about one specific Olympic sport, but it was more about the creative storytelling process for Olympic athletes and really understanding how to position them strategically in the marketplace and align them with meaningful brand partnerships that would kind of help advance their training and help the athletes get to that next level of performance. So that is what I fell in love with about the Olympic athlete representation business way back then.
I find it interesting that you mentioned storytelling with these athletes. When most athletes that we know of in the major sports, that there seems to be like the stereotypical way on how they're so good and they get these agents are dying to get to them in college and things like that, and then once they graduate, then they can start talking. But with Olympic type athletes, the storytelling aspect seems more important for them in order to get that traction from potential sponsors. Is that true?
I agree, Don. Yeah, I think that's true. Olympic athletes or amateur athletes, traditionally, as they've been called, don't often have the benefit of one high-paying endorsement deal in the same way that a lot of team athletes do. If you're talking about NFL, NBA, MLB, soccer, well, men's soccer traditionally, anyways. So I think with Olympic athletes, it really is more about identifying those 3 or 4, 5 or 6 meaningful partnerships that collectively are going to help support the athlete's training, cover their coaching costs, their travel, their nutrition, their equipment needs. So that, I think, when you talk about representing an Olympic athlete, there's more that goes into it. You don't just, I think, execute a quick shoe deal and okay, you're done and move on to the next athlete. It's an ongoing process that evolves as I get to know the athlete more and more. And I have always said that the more I can get to know an athlete and understand their personality, what drives them, what their background is, what makes them tick, something unique about their family, their health history, whatever it might be, the better job I can do of identifying unique opportunities in the marketplace to pursue.
How are you able to develop those relationships? Because that seems like it takes a lot of time and effort and trust.
Trust is a good word. And I do think that's key. I think to start working with an athlete, a lot of times there's hesitation, I think, on their part that we try and manage, and by we, my business partners at Human Interest Group and I try and manage effectively with reasonable expectations. And it's a conversation that, we need to have, I think, upfront at the onset of every relationship with new clients. And I think there's a lot of expectations sometimes with athletes that, if I sign an agent, I'm going to get a car deal, or I'm going to get this lucrative apparel deal. And any agent that ever tells an athlete that is lying. So you always got to take a look at the big picture and just say, look, it's a process and we have to start somewhere. And that's where the trust comes in. And it's trust the process and know that we're in this together and we're going to start building and working together. And, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in a couple weeks or a couple months, but together we'll start laying the foundation. As agents, we'll start getting exposure, get your foot in the door with some smaller sponsorship deals that we can then grow into bigger and bigger opportunities. So there is a process, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot of trust that's wrapped up into that agent-athlete representation process.
Before we got on this podcast, we had talked about athlete expectations on what they could get from an athlete. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that now, because that seems like it's a very important aspect on what you are able to do for an athlete, especially in the difficult part of people may not know these athletes as well as they know the traditional type sports.
True. With expectations, I think, as I mentioned, we always start with a new client with a conversation about expectations. They have to be realistic. I need an athlete to know that it's a competitive market out there, and that for every 100 brand pitches we might send out, we'll be lucky to get 10 responses, maybe resulting in 2 to 3 phone calls, and ideally one deal. So it's a numbers game, and understanding kind of that process, I think, is important. I think, also getting athletes to realize that straight results don't just cut it anymore. Athletes need to have more than just performance. They need to be able to deliver a personality, a voice, a message. They need to have some kind of online presence and identity, as well as business savvy when it comes to their role as a brand ambassador for companies. And companies are more strategic with their brand messaging, and they're getting smarter and less tolerable with athletes who don't take those partnerships seriously or treat them with respect and professionalism. So I think that's a big point that we try and make with athletes. I think, we kind of talked about the rise of the Instagram influencer and how that has somewhat diluted athletic achievement, meaning that some brands would rather pay, a cute model to promote their brand because he or she has a lot of followers, rather than seek out a meaningful partnership with a legitimate athlete who has gotten on a international podium using the product, or, because of the product. And so I think in the long run, brands who are willing to invest in the process of identifying the right athlete ambassador, a credible athlete, is going to be seen by sports fans and consumers as more authentic than brands who simply hire influencers, Instagram influencers, in haste because they just want to, capitalize on the quick visibility.
How difficult is that minefield to navigate through, to find a brand that is conscious of that and wants to do the right thing, but may not know how to do it? Where do you come into that picture?
So that's where I think Human Interest Group is fairly unique. My partners and I collectively have a depth of experience across the industry, both from a management perspective on the Olympic, Ironman, endurance sports side, also from the retail side. My 2 business partners, Franco Vadarat and Michael Cardoza, are both very intelligent and business savvy when it comes to what we do. And I think our approach in working with brands is to really take a step back and just say, look, we don't want to execute a meaningless deal that's not going to be relevant for a brand or for our athlete in the long term. So we would rather put in the extra legwork now and work harder to find the right deal, which means making sure the athlete is 100% comfortable with the partnership they're entering into, and also making sure that the brand is knowledgeable about how they're going to use the athlete. Sometimes brands don't have the bandwidth internally to put together a great ambassador strategy. We can help them with that. Sometimes they're a little short-staffed to handle the execution of, say, a photo shoot or kind of some content production, we can help with that. So when we come with the storytelling, oftentimes we kind of write the dialogue and kind of how the narrative goes, and then share that with a brand. And they're like, oh yeah, this is great. Like, we really like this. We've been trying to come up with an idea. So we try and kind of take things to that next step and do some forward thinking before we're approaching brands. So we're not just slapping a client roster in front of a, marketing director and saying, hey, does anyone look interesting to you? But we've done some research and looked at what the new product line is and which one of our athletes might align well because they've been using it or because they're a big athlete in a key region of the brand. So I think a lot of it is about being willing as agents to put that extra work in, which means our workload is very front loaded and takes a lot going into the beginning of an athlete management relationship, which is why, back to what we were saying earlier, talking about the trust in that process is essential to being successful. You have to kind of understand that, it's not just snapping your fingers and creating a deal, but it's really putting in the time and the effort and the outreach and the discussion to identify that right opportunity that, hopefully will be a multi-year lucrative endorsement opportunity for our clients.
The chore of either finding an athlete or an athlete coming to you, how does that come about in order for you to represent an athlete?
In my career, it's been mostly word of mouth. In certain sports, athletes are pleased with the work that you've done, the relationship that you've had, and they might refer another non-threatening athlete to me or to their agent for representation. So I've always found that to be a great starting point, simply because I know then that the athlete I'm talking to who's coming to me has a genuine interest in working together and investing in the agent athlete relationship. And I think that's always a very positive place to start. However, I've certainly done some recruiting here and there, especially as new sports have emerged in the Olympic space. I ended up working with BMX athletes when the sport made its Olympic debut in Beijing. Going into Tokyo, I really wish I had some surfers just because I think it's going to be so exciting to watch. Yeah. I think with triathlon over the last several Olympics, it's been pretty exciting to, I think, get to work with some of America's first emerging triathletes. And so I've just enjoyed kind of that process of getting involved with some of the newer emerging sports. So that's kind of a second place other than word of mouth to identify clients. In general, the human interest group approach that we're taking is that we've made a discernible effort to diversify our client roster to reflect a mix of endurance athletes, male and female, Olympic and Paralympic, Ironman, long course, and Olympic triathletes, runners, cyclists, and swimmers. We want to be seen as progressive and inclusive. I also think there's a missed opportunity for brands who are ignoring women's sports sponsorship or Paralympic athlete sponsorship. So those are kind of two areas that, we're actively seeking out non-traditional partnership opportunities with smaller and emerging brands who still want to make meaningful connections with consumers, but might not have the same budget to afford a super high profile team or event or individual athlete. I think also brands should not forget that people with disabilities represent a considerable consumer market that's huge in this country and getting bigger. Paralympic sport is one I've been involved in since 2007. And, I not only think it's good business, but I think it's just good to do. It's the right thing to do. And that's a conversation that I'm having more and more with companies who not only want to take a more progressive approach to employee welfare, gender equality from a hiring perspective or from a brand ambassador perspective, but it, kind of goes hand in hand with what those companies also want to do with, sourcing sustainable, environmentally friendly, ingredients or materials in their products. And so I think just that nature of seeking out brands who are more forward thinking and open-minded with their approach to positioning their products and services is really where we're having a lot of marketing success right now.
Yeah, and with the Paralympic athletes, we had the fortune of covering them during Universal Sports and NBC Sports when I was there. And I had the chance to interview some of those para athletes, and they were completely amazing to me in the stories that they have and the ability to do sports that I consider more elevated than able-bodied people. It was very humbling, and I
Hmm.
would like to see more of those types of stories out there to not just inspire, because I know they don't like that word so much, at least some of the ones that I've talked to. They just want to be treated like everybody else, but they do have that extra story that goes along with it that really makes you connect and make you really put things in perspective like, okay, I'm complaining about this. I shouldn't be. Let me just change my perspective. I think that's where they can come in strongest for people who are able bodied.
I agree. I agree with that statement, and I think at the core, Paralympic athletes that I've worked with put in the same amount of time and effort and sweat and blood and tears that able-bodied athletes put in some cases more, because they have some unique challenges that they have to overcome on a day-to-day basis, simply to get to the track or get to the pool or to walk around or travel. And so, mobility for them is sometimes a challenge that just isn't a training factor or implicator for able-bodied athletes. So what I've always tried to do on the marketing side is get decision makers to see the athletes as just that, athletes. And they might happen to be a Paralympic track and field athlete or a swimmer or a triathlete, but at the end of the day, they're still putting in the training. They're still doing all the same things that an able-bodied athlete is doing. And I think that difference, thanks to incredible media support of the United States Olympic now and Paralympic Committee, I think progressive trends like that are amazing. And the difference that I've seen in opportunities for Paralympic athletes since the 2008 Beijing Games up until now has just increased tremendously. We still have a long way to go. I think that's the same case in women's sport, and we're kind of just at a turning point where we've really been pushing for a long time to create some social change in our country and the way that businesses are viewing female athletes, female employees, disabled athletes, and really take a more inclusive approach to how we're all working together. So I love what I feel like I've been able to be part of over the last several Olympic, Paralympic cycles. And I think that we're going to continue to see a lot of really positive changes and opportunities for those athletes continue to develop in the near future.
In terms of these athletes that you're representing, they get a deal and then they get into a situation where they're at the Olympics, where the Olympics have their own list of sponsors, and kind of referring to Olympic Rule 40, which, if I'm not mistaken, only the sponsors with the Olympics are able to have a say. So the brand will have that ability to license their, anything Olympics to that athlete. But it also leaves out the brand that helped get them to the Olympics. How do you see that in the future? How do you see it now?
Well, I think maybe to start, I think the USOPC can sometimes have a very difficult job. I would say it's similar to that of an agent, where you're often in the middle, and your role is to make everybody happy. My job on a day-to-day basis is to make the athlete happy, make the sponsor happy. The USOPC has to keep their worldwide partners happy, and they have to keep all of the athletes and agents happy. So it's always a balance. And what I really do like about the recent revisions, which the USOPC is kind of verbalized as an evolution of athlete marketing in the Olympic and Paralympic space, it is in writing giving more freedom for athletes to publicly acknowledge and thank their personal sponsors who have helped their Olympic journey, that helped them get to where they are. And there's, it takes a village. Oftentimes, a lot of athletes struggle financially. That's no secret, especially in more obscure sports. It can be really tough to earn a living. And a lot of athletes have, families that they're also trying to take care of, and sport is their job. So I think creating a path for athletes to have more success in the marketing arena based on their personal brand and their athletic achievements is going in the right direction. So I appreciate that. I do know that there's been some critiques that the relaxation of the rule and its subsequent interpretation has placed some very strict punishments on any brands who abuse the rule. But I think that's where people like myself come into play with respect to education and making sure that my clients and their individual sponsors understand the implications of Rule 40, what they can do, what they can't. Yes, the athlete can acknowledge their personal sponsors for their support and thank them, but that certainly does not extend any rights to the Olympic marks in any way, shape, or form to that brand who hasn't secured those rights as the official worldwide and Olympic partners have. So I think, again, it's a constant education process for which the responsibility falls on my shoulders to make sure that my clients are informed and that the brands that we work with are informed. But overall, I think it's a very positive move that we're also seeing in different areas of our culture right now. And that's, NCAA sport and the push to allow athletes to receive income on the back end of their personal brand and their athletic achievements. And as an athlete agent, my job is to represent the best interests of my clients. So I will always stick up and defend for what is right and what's most fair for them. And I think finally, for the first time, athletes are starting to have a voice for themselves and be able to say, hey, look, if I'm helping to generate money for an organization, whether that's a national organization or a university, I should have a role in that. I should be able to, profit share, if you will, for lending, my name. And of course, there's a lot of ins and outs to that. It's not a black and white discussion, but overall, I really appreciate the direction that conversation is going, both at the Olympic, Paralympic level, the global level, and also at the collegiate level.
So stepping back to the business inner workings again, we kind of mentioned it off the top. You'd worked with Octagon and IMG. When you start your own company doing this, what are some of the challenges that you had to deal with when you did that?
I worked for several big companies right out of college. Gold Medal Management was reacquired by IMG. Brad Hunt had left IMG with his track and field athletes, started Gold Medal Management, and did such a great job. IMG bought him back. So that was kind of my first introduction to working with a large organization and understanding all the inner workings of a multi-division company like that. I loved it. I loved the experience. I had a great opportunity to travel my first 5, 6, 7, 8 years in the industry, which I think a lot of new employees would not necessarily get to have, maybe jumping in to a larger company, whereas I kind of started with a small company that was reacquired by a big company. I've also worked on my own with my former boss and mentor and longtime friend, Janie Miller, who still works at Octagon. I was with her there for 8.5 years after working with her independently, just the two of us before Octagon for about 3 years. So when I left Octagon, I had a really good taste for the larger corporate space and also the independent, smaller space. And I felt 100% confident in my ability to take my athlete clients, which was the Endurance Sports division that I had started at Octagon, and kind of launch my own representation firm. So I did that going into the Rio 2016 Olympics. I thought it was very successful. I had a couple of triathletes and a cyclist and a Paralympic swimmer. Everybody, or a lot of athletes, did very well in Rio. So I think for me, that was a incredible learning experience. It was a great confidence builder, and just kind of reaffirmed that, it doesn't matter if it's a big company or small company. At the end of the day, it's still me making the phone calls, making the emails, supporting the athletes, and I know how to do my job. So I can do it wearing any hat. And what I'm really happy about is I think on the back end of running my own show for a couple of years, I realized that one of the things that I missed was the camaraderie of the sales team at a bigger company. And I missed having kind of that partnership with other employees. And so that was one thing that I decided, I think I might like to have some business partners again. And right about that time, I started talking to Franco and Michael at Human Interest Group, and they had been doing very well on the Ironman representation side with athletes like Craig Alexander and Tim Don and Rachel Joyce, and had a lot of unparalleled success there. So collectively, we decided that our experience across triathlon and broader endurance sports arena would really be a strategic fit for all three of us. So I was happy to kind of, come back, not be at a big company, not be independent, but still, be a partner, have an active role with day-to-day operations for the company. I'm directing athlete marketing and sales, negotiating endorsements, doing all the things that I love to do, but in a smaller, lean, mean house. So I'm really happy with where I am right now. And I think we collectively have made some really good strategic decisions for Human Interest Group over the last 12 months. And we're really excited about where we're headed, I think, for the next year or two, and some of the areas that we're planning to expand.
I'm talking with Heather Novickis, athlete agent for the Human Interest Group. Heather, what kind of success have you been able to find for the athletes that you've represented? And then how do those deals come about? Because it seems like it's not a typical business deal.
Good question. And I think I might start by saying a lot of the athlete brand partnerships that we execute are done by relationships, by maintaining long-standing, trusted business partnerships with decision makers at agencies, Olympic sponsors, mainstream brands. So that there's an open dialogue with the decision makers who are being hit with a lot of other athlete names when it comes time to pick a brand ambassador, and I think that comes from always being honest with the athlete that you're presenting. Sometimes they're going to be a fit, sometimes they're not, but just making sure that as an agent, I am always upfront and transparent about what the athlete stands for, even what they don't, what they're willing to do, what they're opposed to, is the best way to keep that open dialogue going with decision makers at a variety of companies. I think I'd say I'm especially proud of some of the work that I've done for female athletes. I have been able to negotiate some of the longest term, most lucrative triathlon endorsement deals for female triathletes in history, which I've been proud of, since triathlon, again, a couple of Olympic cycles ago, was just not as well known or popular as it was today. The rise of Ironman certainly brought more attention to the sport, but I really think the London Olympics and the focus on the Brownlees and the excitement of triathlon through the city really kind of helped put the sport on the radar of a lot of Olympic sponsors. So being able to build on that momentum and sign triathletes with companies like Visa and Ernst & Young, and then cross that and to Oakley, all on the Olympic side, and also extend the marketability of those athletes beyond the Olympic space to more mainstream brands like Sleep Number, Jenny-O Turkey, Columbia Threadneedle, I think was a great success for me. Similarly, on the Paralympic side, again, where we had talked earlier, Paralympic sport was a tough sell back in 2008 and going into the Beijing Games. I think there was a lot of pity for Paralympic athletes, and a lot of brands thought that featuring an athlete who was missing a limb or maybe blind or were a prosthetic was going to turn consumers away from their product or service, as opposed to relate to consumers who might also be facing some type of physical disability on their own. So fast forward, again, I think through the London 2012 Paralympics, that was just stellar, so well done. I went to both the London Olympics and Paralympics, and there were more people at each swimming event at the Paralympics than there were at the Olympics. And I say that because a lot of times the sponsors buy out sections of tickets for the Olympics and everyone's so busy. So that all of those seats don't get used all the time. But every single seat was filled at the London Paralympic Games because tickets were more readily available to the public and people wanted to be there and they enjoyed seeing the sport. So I thought that was a big turning point for Paralympic sport, which I was able to turn into the first multi-year swim apparel deal for a Paralympic athlete with Arena. We were able to do some innovative first in the fashion industry with the Tommy Adaptive Apparel line. There's been book deals. There's been speaking engagements from colleges to U.S. Department of State to World Economic Forum.
Wow.
A lot of very interesting athlete opportunities that I don't think were available back in 2008, 2010, until after the 2012 Olympic Games, that seemed to be kind of a benchmark and a bit of a pivotal point, at least in my experience, for female athletes and I think for some Paralympic athletes.
You had mentioned earlier, you touched on it a little bit, when brands are out there seeking an athlete to speak on behalf of them, do they look strictly at the dollars? Or are they looking at more of the social issues, or is it a combination of both now?
I think that more progressive brands are taking an innovative approach to all of their business practices, which I think is also going to include their sponsorship plans and who their brand ambassadors are. So I think while brands are making decisions how to manufacture with sustainable, environmentally friendly materials, they're also making decisions about which athletes to align with and how do we make, strategic decisions. I think budget is always a factor. Therefore, you're going to have brands who, sometimes come to us and they're just like, hey, we have a lot of money, who do you have? We want, the full gamut, somebody super high profile. But other times, they're not going to have that same level of budget, but they want a meaningful way to connect with the market and with consumers. And I think that's where Human Interest Group can really shine, because that's where we can step in and just say, look, we can write some interesting dialogue for you that is going to fit with your budget, that's going to fit with your company's mission, with your values, that's going to align you with the right athlete, and it's going to offer, a creative story angle here, that might tie in a social cause, might tie in an athlete's personal experience. But really, I think it goes all ways for companies right now. They're looking at the whole picture with dollars, the social causes, their brand objectives. And it's a struggle sometimes. I mean, that's why that's a lot of information for brands to filter through when they're trying to find that right brand ambassador. And I think that's where, as agents, we try and help as a facilitator and try and help, cut through all of the other athletes out there and just say, look, like, what are you looking for? And hopefully, we have somebody who might, check the boxes.
And then the female athletes and the progress that they've made over the course of, I'd say, the last 10 years, maybe even a little bit longer than that. How do you see the future of that going forward?
I think it's been a lot of fun over the last several Olympic cycles to see the advancement of female athletes, but I still think we have a long way to go. I take a lot of pride in some of the endorsement opportunities that I've procured and implemented that have featured female athletes that traditionally have been very male dominated, from swimming and triathlon, I think are two sports that are examples of that. I think brands are starting to realize that women not only represent half the population, but a lot of buying power and decision-making power. By embracing female athletes and moms and families, they're also connecting with dads and men who are partners with those women and part of those families. And so it's been a very interesting, I guess, social evolution to kind of watch how brands are winning by thinking more broadly and inclusively, rather than saying we're just going to go for the male athlete. And, even the NFL has done that, coming out with, the women's apparel line and really targeting the female sports fan. So, I still feel like a lot of this is very current, and we do have a long way to go, but I love being on the forefront of that with my business partners. And I appreciate that they share the same passion for sport and for advancing the success of our female clients, just as much as we do our male athlete clients. So I'm excited about our role in that evolution in the next few years.
Well, I'm a girl dad, so I'm trying
Same.
to do my part. Okay, so what do you love about what you do, and how you've been able to accomplish it? We've covered a lot already of what you've done, but what is it about what keeps you going and keeps you driven?
Great question. I love sports. I've been active and enjoying sport my whole life. And I feel like I'm really lucky to have a job that I've loved doing for 20 years. I appreciate the life lessons that sport teaches: perseverance, leadership, teamwork, responsibility, work ethic. If I can pass on some of those lessons to my kids, I'll consider that a great success. Being an athlete agent means that I experience the highs and lows of my athlete clients, which I think is both the best and worst part of my job. I'm not selling widgets, I'm selling people. So my success is tied to their success, and congruently, I'm responsible for overseeing their sponsorship goals and financial security, which can sometimes create a lot of pressure.
Well, you can change lives.
Well, I know that's the upside. So when when you get to share in an athlete's victory, however that's defined, sometimes it's recovering from injury and just getting to a race. Sometimes it's crossing the finish line with a PR. Sometimes it's getting on the podium. Sometimes it's winning an Olympic medal. Sometimes it's making their first Paralympic team. Getting the opportunity to share in that success is a very, very special part of my job. And that keeps me going through some of the down times where, when athletes, do have bad days, and sometimes they do, I feel those as well. I think to be a good agent, I have to be emotionally tied into my clients. The more that I get to know them, and the closer that, we can work together as a team, and to build that trust and to develop that relationship, the better job I can ultimately do of representing them. And I think the more successful we're going to be together in the long run.
What is the craziest story that you have working in this industry?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. There's a lot of things that stick out. I think I will always remember, when I just think of a short highlight list, I think of beach volleyball at the Sydney 2000 Olympics, which was just an epic event. I think about being in Japan in my early career with Michael Johnson. Was a long time ago. He was on a Japanese TV show, which, if you've never seen a Japanese reality show, they're very entertaining.
Yeah.
It's very like slap happy humor, maybe not quite in line with Michael's serious approach to sport and business at the time, but that was always a big highlight of my early career, to get to see something like that, and have the opportunity to travel internationally with the client. It was also during 9/11, so I always remember being in Yokohama on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
I think more positively, is a lot of athlete agents can appreciate the Sports Illustrated parties, which are no more, but really were known as some of the most, I think, epic social events of the games for many, many Olympics.
Is that putting it mildly?
That's putting it mildly. You have to sign a non-disclosure form before
wow.
entering in. So that's as much as I could. No, I'm just kidding. That's as much as I could say about it. But no, those are always, just a lot of fun highlights to kind of balance out, I think, the work. When I was still with Octagon, I worked with a lot of winter sports athletes then. So having the opportunity to go to some of the X Games events in Aspen and some ski events. I've skied my whole life, but was never really around competition. So I think being able to see the progress and the evolution of like slope style and how, half pipe and snowboarding has just, changed after, becoming an emerging sport. And who are those snowboarders, to just watching the Chloe Kims and just watching these incredible, amazingly talented athletes dominate a sport from as Americans, I think was very, very cool. So I don't know, I'd have to think even more about the crazy stories. There's so many, I think, incredible, memorable moments I have from the Olympics and from competitions, watching athletes win, being in the stands with their families, being next to their sponsors, and just having the chance to reflect on everything that collectively everybody put into that moment. And of course, the athlete deserves the credit for all of the training and the work that they've done, and to be able to play a small role in that as an agent is a pretty special thing. And so that would certainly be the high of my job, and keeps me coming back to have more of those epic moments and figure out what the next crazy story is going to be.
Yeah, I think that when people are exposed to those and they get that up close type of feel for it, they do have a different appreciation for it, much as I did working with the Olympic Channel and seeing all these sports that I really didn't have interest for, but it wasn't in the forefront of my way of being an athlete. But man, if I could have maybe taken a different route, I would have at least attempted to try and do some of the things that they do, because there's no way I'd be able to do that now.
What sports would you like for your daughter to do? It's a good exercise.
Well, she tended to run when she was younger. She's lost a little bit of interest in that now, but they're kids and they'll change their minds. She's interested in golf. But I think she would be an endurance athlete, if anything. So maybe one day we will be in touch for her.
There you go.
All right. Go ahead.
No, just for the record, I mean, you talk about women's sport, and that's one other area. We didn't really talk about marathon, but I started out in track and field, and having the opportunity to come back to distance running through women's marathon has been a really, really cool development from my perspective. I think because the American women have just been dominating like never before. I mean, the most competitive Olympic trials in history. And again, I think just looking at how many talented women there are that are out there that are being, covered by the media and talked about and tweeted about and promoted by brands, I think is awesome. So another very positive development, I think, in the goal to, equate women's marketing. But yeah, since you mentioned your daughter was a bit of a runner, that's been a really, really fun space to work in.
Yeah, I enjoy running. I've covered the Boston Marathon over the number of years, the Chicago Marathon, so I get to see all of that, and it's really helpful for me to get me off of my butt and get out there and run. So I only have a few more minutes with you here, but what advice would you have for someone looking to work in this industry, doing what you do?
Great question. I think I recently met with a friend's daughter who is in college on the East Coast. She's actually pursuing a sports management degree offered by her university, which, as I mentioned before, didn't even exist when I was in college. So, my advice to her is to try and intern or work to get as much experience as you can to figure out what you really like doing. There really are a lot of avenues to pursue in the sports business. I think that's especially true for a woman in the sports business now. Back when I started, I was one of only 2 female agents that I knew of. And that's completely changed now. There's a lot of incredible experience, women representing all kinds of athletes now, but that didn't exist a long time ago. So I think it's great that she will have some more of a variety of opportunities that weren't quite as available to me 20 years ago. I'm dating myself. The other thing is, there's a lot of ways to be involved in the athlete ambassador arena. So, being an agent's one of them, but all the decision makers that I work with, on the apparel side, whether it's the ASICs or the On Runnings, or it's the Red Bulls or, whomever else it might be. There's a lot of opportunity on the brand side. And with the brand side also comes the agencies. So I've seen a lot of people right out of college, I think, go and work for a bigger agency, and they might work for like a Visa or a GMR that can offer them some great experiences on the Olympic side. So I think investigating and being open-minded to the variety of roles that there are in the sports industry is a great way to approach it. And I say that because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I want to be an athlete agent. And I'm like, well, do you? Is that what you really want to do? And do you understand what it's like? And it's not, I don't live an episode of Ballers. It's not Jerry Maguire. Like, it's just not. Like, sure, there's those moments, and there's, some first class flights and parties and Oscars and unique events to go to here and there. But every other day you're doing the work and putting in the hours. So you got to find something that you like to do. And the sports industry is a lot of fun, but there's a lot of different roles to pursue where you could still find that one job that you really like doing, and be a part of it.
And I would say as well for you, a lot of sacrifice.
I would say sacrifice in being away from my family for traveling. But I think that's the fun part. Like I always say, if I could, I'd travel every week and go and watch all of my athletes race. And that's all I do is just travel around from one event to the next, because that's the most fun part of what I do. But then I would get absolutely nothing done, and my inbox would explode. And nobody would have any deals after 6 months, because you got to keep up with the day-to-day operations and business management. And so, I'm more effective in the office, but I would certainly love nothing more than to just go around to all the competition. So I try and get to see everyone compete as much as I can. This is obviously a unique year with the Tokyo Olympics, Paralympic. So I'm excited to watch some athletes compete at trials and some other upcoming events. So I'm looking forward to it.
Do you see a role for yourself in any of this Olympic movement, with that? Because I'd read an article recently, and I can't remember where, talking about how there's more women that they want to be a part of making decisions at the Olympic level. Does that interest you?
Perhaps one day, but I think right now I still love my job. And what I love is that it changes all the time. It changes every year just because of different athletes that I have the opportunity to work with. Some athletes retire, some move on and decide they're going to be their own agents. Some athletes are up and coming, so we've just signed them. Every year is a little bit different. And when you add in social trends like the gender equality and evolution of women in sport and changes to Rule 40 or whatever it might be, that always keeps things changing for me on a day-to-day. So I love what I do, but it's never the same from year to year, sometimes month to month. And we have to react to trends, whether it's coronavirus and how that's impacting our athlete clients and their brand partners. We have to respond to, positive body image, statements that athletes are making, and how are we embracing that and aligning athletes with strategic partnerships because of what their personal platform or messaging is. So I can't say I am looking for anything else other than to continue to do an exceptional job with integrity and professionalism that I'm doing now, because I love it. I always welcome the developments and the evolution of it, because I know that's always going to be there. It always has been, and it'll continue to be there. And it keeps things fresh. It keeps me on my toes. It keeps us thinking progressively, and it continues to present a challenge. And that's very appealing to me.
All right. What's the best advice you've ever been given working in this industry?
Boy, that is a good question. Yeah, I I don't know that it was advice. I'd say that working at Gold Medal Management, I had a really unique opportunity there. Brad was a really hard, tough first boss, but he taught me really well about, crossing T's and dotting I's and attention to detail. And those are lessons that I still use today. And Janie, as a mentor and one of the really first well-known female agents in the industry, I learned a lot from her about what it was like to be a female agent in this business and what to do and what not to do and how to effectively represent your clients, whether they're men or women. So I think I take a lot from those early years in the industry because they were challenging and they were hard. But I learned a lot. I fell in love with what I did, and I've continued to try and make myself better at it since.
Are there a lot of people that are interested in what you do?
I think it's evolving quite a bit. I think one trend like that I've seen is individuals are like representing athletes on the side where they have a job maybe for a brand, and then they're kind of also working for a few athletes on the side, which personally, I don't understand that because it's like, I've got a full-time job and I can barely do it. So if I had another job and then I was just doing this on the side, like, I just don't think I'd be a very effective agent. So I think some athletes either decide like, oh, I don't need an agent, I'm going to handle it myself, or I just don't want to pay commission, or, oh, here's this agent over here who's going to, they're only going to charge me, a half commission or lower commission. So I'm going to go with them. But you're not really getting the same quality of the services. So in some cases, you get what you pay for. And that's kind of been a trend where, Franco and Michael and I are sometimes sitting here like, wait a minute, like, but they're represented by who? And so it's just, it's kind of, I think, diluted a little bit the, traditional athlete agent model. But, I think people are also adapting and shifting because it is a challenging business model. So as we kind of talked about before, having some brand clients to balance out what your athlete clients may be doing or not doing is not a, poor way to, protect your revenue streams or diversify your revenue stream. So I think that's what I see is just changes to who the athlete agents are. Some people come out of nowhere and you're like, I've never heard of this person. Who are they? Some people are very specialized in one sport and they might just sign, like 10 or 15 swimmers and that's all they do. But we're trying to take our business, a step beyond that to really cover the broader endurance sports arena and a variety of sports that might cover and try and be successful in a broader area than just saying, okay, we're just going to work with triathlon or we're just going to work in swimming. We want to do a little bit more than that and also make sure we're paying close attention to women in sport and Paralympic sport. I think we're just really trying to build something different at Human Interest Group. And we do bring a lot of passion and integrity to what we're doing, but I think we also like being, creative with our approach, and it takes, more time. I mentioned like the front loaded process and everything that we have to put into understanding an athlete's story and writing it in paper and a pitch and telling that story an email and a phone call. And it's not the snap of a fingers. There's a process to evolve that dialogue. And some people either can't do it or don't want to do it because it is a greater time investment. But that's the part of the process that we really love. And that's a part of my job that I like. And when you hit a home run with an athlete because you put that time in and you did the work and you told the story and you found a meaningful match and you finally, get the ink signed on that deal, like that's super exciting. Like that's my finish line. That's my podium performance. That's my like, woohoo. And I love that. And that's a fun part of the job. And it's the hardest part, but it's not easy for an athlete to get on the podium or win races. It's not easy to find big endorsement deals and execute them. It's challenging. It's hard, but I like it. I like that process.
I can feel it in your voice. To your knowledge, you were one of only 2 women agents when you started?
So thinking back, Janie had one other friend who was an agent at a different company. Her name was Susie. And then there was like Cheryl Shade, who's still a gymnastics agent, very successful. And they're the only ones that I can remember from when I first started in the industry.
In the whole industry, in the whole sports industry.
I mean, in the Olympic space, in the Olympic space. So, going to all the, the Coca-Cola shoots and the visas and, all the Nike shoots and all that stuff and all the, Olympic related events. It was a lot of men and just a couple of us. And I find it very different now. I think I know more female athletes or more female agents in Boulder. So it's remarkable, I think, how that shifted. But yeah, I think when I started out, there were not very many. But what I think is kind of cool is the ones that I've known have continued to stay in it, which I think says something about the shared passion for the space of Olympic sport. It's intriguing and it's enticing. And I think if you're lucky enough to get into it and you find that you like it, it's a great space to spend your career.
So if anyone wants to find out more about Human Interest Group and the work that you guys are doing for these athletes around the world, how can they find out more?
I would invite anyone to visit humaninterestgroup.org. Check out our website and our list of athlete clients and some of the brand projects we're involved with. And of course, feel free to email me with any questions, heather@humaninterestgroup.org.
Heather, I'm so glad that I reached out to connect with you again. I feel
like that was fun.
This is something that is important for people to hear about what goes on, because it's not just glamour and it's not just about the fun part of the athletes, but you're doing a great service for athletes who really haven't had that traditional way of branding themselves. So I appreciate your information and all the time you spent with me.
Thanks for having me, Don. It's a job of passion, and hopefully I'll inspire some others to get a little bit more involved in the sports industry. So thanks again.
All right, that was Heather Novickis, athlete agent at the Human Interest Group. I've really enjoyed getting to know more about what Heather does in her job, where it's taken her, and how much she's been able to do in her career. Once sports gets back up and running, I'm sure there will be a lot of work for her to do, and every agent around the world as well. Heather is one of those people that, for me, I felt like I made an immediate connection with. Someone that I felt like I've known for a while, and so it was great that we got to catch up again and share some time together. On the next episode of the Sports in the Making podcast, we'll talk about what goes into making one of the most prestigious races in all of sports special, the Boston Marathon. Finding the best distance runners from around the world doesn't just happen on paper. It requires a lot of research and active participation to make sure the best elite marathoners are selected to run down Boylston Street towards the finish line. My guest, Mary Kate Shea, will tell us all that's involved in this process. It's a great conversation, and there's a lot of information on the Boston Marathon. So if you know of any runners, make sure to let them know about this episode. If you have any suggestions on what you'd like to know more about in sports, drop me a line at sportsinthemaking.com or contact me on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, I'd love to include them in a future episode with your name. Wherever you listen to this podcast, I'd appreciate it if you like it, share it, and leave positive reviews on your social media channels. Also, be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes, and you can catch up on previous ones there as well. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.